I'm podcasting now.
Jeez. Okay. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's episode of the Coworking Values Podcast, which is the podcast of the European Co-working Assembly. And before we get into it, let's go over to Zelko for a little word from our sponsor.
This episode is brought to you by Cobot, a leading management software for co-working spaces, office hubs, and flexible workspaces around the world. You know, one of the best things about Cobot is that it is produced by people who manage a co-working space and know the ins and outs of the main problems and issues bugging co-working managers. So if you want more time for your coworkers and community, check out Cobot at cobot.me and take your co-working management to the next level.
Gee, thanks for that. So on this week's episode, we have Rowena. And Rowena, before I fluff the whole thing and don't introduce you beautifully, what are you known for and what would you like to be known for?
Oh, I'm known for being a remote work advocate and very hopefully prominent and well known in the established remote work community. Well before COVID, which is great. I'm one of the few, in terms of me having experience. I've been working remotely since 2007, Bernie. And what would I like to be known for? Well, I'd like to be known for one of the few people in the world that's developed academic courses in remote work skills. So I'm a great believer that what we're doing today, how we work remotely better together, best practice, needs to move into training, education, academia properly. So I'm working currently with multiple universities to take those remote work skills and turn them into really practical courses that undergrads and postgrads and our future workforce can avail of. So they're equipped.
Yahoo. So when COVID hit and everyone started going, oh, let's work remote, how did you feel about that? Because I've been working remotely 2010, not traveling, working remotely, but working with people online. And people started talking about this. And I was like, that's what we do anyway. And then I didn't realize how much of the world didn't know how to work remotely. And what happened to you?
Yeah, it was really interesting. Well, suddenly I was very popular, Bernie, after banging a drum for quite a few years. And I mean, I got lots of extra requests for lots of live sessions, lots of training. And within that, for me personally, and I know I'm speaking to people who are still in the midst of COVID and still in the waves of the pandemic, quite serious in different countries. So to respect everyone's individual place in that, in Spain, in Zaragoza, where I normally live, and even ongoing now in Aragon, there is a highest instance in the world, I think, of coronavirus cases. So we had full severe lockdown. And so on a personal level, which I think is quite important, with suddenly all this interest in remote work and everyone asking about it and wanting to know how to do it and all the rest of it, personally, it was very traumatic because I was stuck in a 70-meter apartment with my husband and a 6-year-old trying to homeschool, and we had almost no outside access. So doing my work as a remote worker, trying to work day to day, was like nothing I'd ever experienced. So what was really interesting for me was I took all the lecturing that I would do and the best advice and the training, and I actually had to revisit a lot of that every day, multiple times. It was like a microcosm of that best practice and advice, because what I advise people is, as a knowledge worker, as a home worker, as a remote worker, your time away from the computer is as important as your time on it. What manages as a priority and helps you take care of yourself self-care wise, to maintain sustainable remote work, to keep you healthy and happy and functioning, is as important. And when we're confined to these small spaces, dealing with massive stresses, sharing spaces, external stress, illness, whatever it may be, it's so difficult to do that, Bernie. So for me personally, I had to really, really mind myself. That's the only way I can answer that in terms of that response and being able to do my job then day to day after that.
I'm going to jump in and ask a question. So being a remote worker for a long time, and even a person who does training in remote work. So the COVID situation brought about something that is different from just normal remote work, because in remote work, people, got used to working not just from home, but also from co-working spaces, from coffee shops, from wherever they found the needs and the that they can work from. In this situation, the pandemic, we were confined, so even freelancers and remote workers found themselves in a situation that they cannot go out. They are confined to a space that may not be their primary remote work location. So how did that bear on your situation and your comprehension of remote work?
A really good point, because that's what I would start all my sessions with, reminding it wasn't normal remote work. It wasn't even normal work from home. It was emergency remote work. It was emergency working from home in a crisis, because what the whole established remote work community of advocates, experts, academics around the world, some of the first reactions on social media were, we need to let people know this is not what it's normally like. And I would always introduce all my training to exactly that. I would explain that in January and February, my normal week was a day or two in a shared co-working. It was maybe a day at home or morning at home, and it was a day in the library or some time in the cafeteria. I moved around. I moved around and did my work. My hashtag is work is not a place. It's that freedom work from any place. If I had a literature review to do for a paper, if I had to develop e-learning content, I blocked my calendar for certain hours and I would choose where to work from. That is not what we've all, and what we're still all going through. And it's a really important distinction, because people have experienced it so differently. And there's been, as you say, people, I think we need to, and you'll hear a lot of people in the community talking about it, but we need to keep going on about it to get over the point that you choose where and when you work. We haven't been able to do this in the pandemic, in the crisis.
And from your experience in the talks that you had with other people, so how quickly did people adapt to this situation?
I think what was really interesting is I noticed at the very start, when I started doing, and I was doing some training sessions and support sessions for two large insurance companies in the UK and Ireland. And since March, actually, I have had over 1,000 people on these sessions. Lots of big companies through an employee assistance program. And at the start, the stress levels were palpable. And people were simply asking things like, how do I stop feeling guilty about my child running in onto my calls? How do I create boundaries between work and life? How do I stop being so exhausted? How do I improve my sleep? And I'm not a healthcare expert or a mental health expert, but that was the type of fundamental in the first few weeks. People were just trying to get through the day. And it would be simple reminder that they needed to balance that time at the computer, because what we know from the established research in remote work, we talk about productivity in remote work, and there is lots of research to show that if you give workers autonomy within certain reason and all of that, they will be and can be more productive with the right training and the right established processes and procedures. But if they haven't got that and some of those checks and balances, they may overwork. Particularly when people with children who are logging on at 5:30 in the morning to get those quiet hours in before the kids get up again at night. Where does the day start and end? Nobody knows. But what's really important to note is that if we look at the established remote work companies around the world, the GitLabs, GitHubs, Automatics, all of them talk about the transition when they're bringing in new team members, onboarding. HubSpot transitioned to a remote work division about 1.5 years ago now, and they did it over a year. They do a year. These big companies of training, establishing policies, all of that, and people were doing it overnight with no notice. So we had to remind everyone, and I've been continuously reminding it, there's been no transition period. There's been no time to adapt. People are in shock, right? Yeah. And even coming onto sessions with me, where I would say, do you feel like you're in shock, or how are you doing? And people would say, it's the first time I've stopped in 3 weeks and realized that I am stressed. I am shocked. I haven't had time to myself. etc. And so it's been really interesting to watch. Now there's a bit more, it's more established. And where I am now with some of my sessions actually is getting particularly managers and leaders to focus on the positive, okay? To focus on what's worked during this crisis and what's been working so far. But actually, because we're going to hybrid, which we may come on to talk about, where people are starting to go back to the office, maybe go to co-working spaces, that also there's been some space to reflect, that there's maybe the chance for workers to process what's happened. And on an emotional intelligence, on a psychology level, for me, that's really important, because otherwise we don't have a little bit of a transit. We can't move to a new chapter if we haven't. Yeah.
What is very important also is that companies. I've talked about this a couple of days ago. So companies, depending on how big they are or how focused they are thinking in two ways. Some very narrow-minded are looking from week to week, day to day on updates to the situation. When can we go back to the offices? When are we able to bring our people back to the offices? How are we going to change things? And this is okay from a personal point of view and, from a home set, or when can I see my friends and so on. We see other major companies like, Google and Apple and Facebook and Twitter that are saying and already have said, we are expanding the stay-at-home work or remote work policy until mid 2021 or early 2021. Or Twitter said, from now, every worker will be able to work from home if they wanted indefinitely. So how are, from your experience and what you have had a pulse on, companies, acted?
It's such a mixed bag. It's so different depending on the company, depending on whether they survived. I just want to acknowledge, because I've come across people furloughed, all of that, and divisions and different. So it really depends on how they have survived and then what provisions they've put in, how proactive they've been in their communications in terms of what their plans are. But when I do my sessions, I do obviously sometimes have management teams on or leaders, but a lot of my sessions as well would be with the employees directly. And what I try and do is work with them where they are in that day, where they are in that space. So again, because they can't control often where and when they're working, right? I try and on an individual level, look at what they can influence in their day, what they can control, what they can change. For example, ensuring they have their self-care. For example, ensuring they maybe have a buddy they can reach out to, etc. And giving them some tips that come from the established. A lot of it comes from the established remote work companies and research that shows, for example, calendar planning, time management, etc. needs to be so explicit and so intentional. And that's what's really interesting about looking at what's happened. I think the companies that have been more vulnerable are the managers, and that's what make the companies, and the leaders and the people that create the companies that have been more vulnerable and empathetic and maybe more open to discussion about how they've been impacted, having those open, no work chat, virtual calls, for example, right? Hosting these different online events that people can join in with no pressure, et cetera, to support and engage with their workers. They're the ones I can see that are more engaged and are more have their finger on the pulse and are able and available to support their workers. But it's been such a mixed bag. And I think also, just to comment, I deal with lots of different countries. So I also have some other projects with the States. So it's so dependent on what's happening regionally. Again, speaking on behalf of Spain, I'm in Tarragona at the moment. Personally, I was able to move down here luckily from Aragon. But I mean, Aragon is facing the potential full lockdown again. where we normally live. And so it's just this virus, in terms of its impact, it's you have to be so sensitive to people either feeling a different wave of the virus, experiencing a different wave of the virus, or feeling it in terms of fatigue, if that makes sense. Some people have just motored along on autopilot for 3 months, and then they're slammed, for example, for a month or two, because they actually only process the impact of what it's been like for them. So,
Rowena, what did you? I've got to try and. I haven't got a cool question, so I'm just going to shout it out. It seemed to me that before COVID, remote work had this kind of cool little thing, yeah, we're remote working. Yeah, babe, we're remote working. Yeah. And then COVID hit. And in that first week, because just to, ladies and gentlemen, I am not a remote work expert. I just happen to be the person in a small group that knew the most about it. So I went on webinars, and I was on a webinar with someone from a taxi company that I won't say the name, but it rhymes with scuba. And I wanted to, I wasn't over the moon with that individual's response, because he said, me and my wife have come to our cabin and we're able to work remotely. And it just occurred to me, and I said it on the webinar, that's a very privileged thing, isn't it? Remote work assumes that we're all going to run to our holiday homes, pop open our state-of-the-art Mac computers and sip a mojito while we do our work. But there's the reality, as you described, is a lot of people who thrown into a situation without the right equipment and, cooped up. And how do you think its images before, during, and after, and then, ladies and gentlemen, we'll get to co-working, I promise.
Is this coming from you pissed off standing in your kitchen over a laptop? I needed to plug that in. So
I've got a state of the art. I don't know. The sticker wore off.
No, it's a really good question, because I spent 2 years up until more or less 24 months up until this year or COVID coming in, working with people like John O'Dinn in the States, who looks at socioeconomic benefits of remote work at a regional and governmental level in the States. The same with the Irish government. I've been involved in policy and consultation, various projects with them. And back then I was there with others going, let's look at all this amazing research, return on investment calculators, Bernie, that exist. We save on carbon emissions. The list, you could go on, right? But do you know what's really important to pull out? And it was in there, but it only made sense in the first few weeks of COVID, was business continuity or disaster recovery.
Of course.
Right? So obvious, but there's actually so little discussion about it, right? So it's just reflecting, because we're all still reflecting on these last few months. Look at all the companies. You saw these statements going, we're sending, Facebook is sending X people home, blah, 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 when the COVID. They were able to do that because in the main, their infrastructure was able to handle it. Now, I'm not saying that the individual workers were all on perfect systems and have perfect connectivity. It's a whole other discussion whether their broadband or their connection individually in their home locations was working. But we seem to miss that one of the major benefits in the pandemic of remote working was it enabled business continuity.
There's but I still think it's got this image. I mean, sorry to skip so quickly from what you just said, is I still think it had this kind of privileged sense about it, because there's people I know who have good jobs, but they've been working in their bedrooms for 3 months now, and we have calls with the London Co-working Assembly twice a week, and suddenly we've done 40 calls, and some of those people who are even the owners and community managers are sitting on their bed because that's the only room in their house where they can get some peace. So it does assume A, an internet connection, and B, the right equipment. And I think I just felt that it was this cool thing to do, and then suddenly it was the harsh reality of keeping a company going and keeping a job.
Definitely, and I think you're right. There's this digital nomad on the beach image that was in existence, okay, that was maybe confusing. There was also a lot of unofficial remote working, Bernie, okay? Officially in company policies, I got a real sense of this when I was doing the various sessions, that I might find out from HR managers that they had an official flexible working policy or not pre-COVID. But when I would host sessions, I'd find out from individual workers that unofficially the odd day was done from home. Okay. So there was a lot of, or wherever you choose to do it. As we know, they might have gone to a library or a co-working or a different office or whatever with the connection. So I think there wasn't the measure of that. But yeah, it's interesting because it's thrown it all upside down. And the thing is, in terms of a business case, in my community, we were often talking about the justification for having flexible working and remote working, having the ROI down, having the business case down and ready to speak to a company, or even at a government level if it was on a public sector agency or whatever. But that's been flipped now in terms of, in my mind, where I see it moving is this ability to handle disaster recovery or business continuity.
So obviously it would be better that we hadn't had a global pandemic and people thrown into, I absolutely don't want to make light of it because, I know people in Argentina that have been in lockdown in their flat for like 100 and something days now. And it's just, it's impossible to think about. But what is available for us coming out of this? Because I feel, and you can, please, I'm sure you will comment, but I feel companies with somewhat like archaic command and control policies in place, either officially or unofficially, have been forced into flipping the way they operate. And some of that is for the good. And, what do you think is available now? We've all been forced into work collectively differently.
I think the awareness is there. I think because unfortunately, again, and you already said it, with that empathy and appreciation of the waves of COVID and people still going through a horrible time individually with it, in confinement or whatever is happening personally for them, that we moved on from, can we set up remote working, to, there's Zoom fatigue. What is the health and safety of an individual remote worker? Like, lots of the media moved on, okay, and the reporting moved on to more viable discussions about that it's not a one-size-fits-all. In recent weeks now in Ireland, there's been the discussion of hashtag home and hub, Bernie, to bring it to co-working, bring in the co-working point.
Beautiful.
Beautiful, exactly. Because it's realised, and I'm justification of that, I got to, in Zaragoza, I managed to access a local co-working temporarily there in June, El Recreo, a small space that I was able to join temporarily for 4 weeks. And my life changed after almost 3 months in lockdown. My mental health drastically improved. My stress levels went down because I was able to separate work and life. Because what I found when I was in confinement trying to work, that my brain, I couldn't switch off. I didn't even have that 10-minute commute because I couldn't go outside my apartment. So I managed to do that in Zaragoza, and I've maintained that in Tarragona, in the temporary residence we have here. I don't take my computer home. And for me, I'm so much better able to handle my own personal mental space and productivity because of that. So it's even moved on. Apart from the safety angle of COVID and making our spaces safe for people returning to any type of office space or shared space, there's been acknowledgement of what those co-working and community hubs provide. There's more of an appreciation of where they fit in our model going forward. And that's what I'm hoping, both on an individual and a company level, this dialogue and this conversation and awareness, it all progresses as we go forward.
So if you were standing, because you probably are, like millions of people listen to this podcast, Rowena.
Okay.
If you were standing there and said, look, co-working space owners, this is what I want you to do in the next couple of months. Okay. And it's August. Is August we're recording this, isn't it?
Yeah.
What could we do? Because I feel there's like a people are drinking from the fire hose about the future of work at the moment, and there's a few simple little things. I know like childcare is a big one, and the mental well-being. What could we do as a co-working community to help and support remote workers, or the new breed of remote workers?
It's a two-pronged answer. Listen to your community you already have. Listen to the community around you, the people that are making inquiries. Listen to the discussions that are happening in the neighborhood, in your network, and experiment. So what do I mean by experiment? So, for example, I've given this as a simple example. Myself and my husband share our co-working spot in Tarragona because we're doing a team on childcare. We do have, luckily, a summer camp our daughter is attending, but we were able to balance where we do a couple of days on, a couple of days off between us in our co-working space. But also our co-working owner has been so helpful on all, because we've come into the area for the summer, on all things to do with, you need help with sourcing this, getting packages, etc., public transport, all the things we needed to know. So that experimentation, services is the word I kind of add on to that. So I was even thinking, for example, Bernie, that maybe co-working spaces need to look at temporary accommodation that they could maybe link in with locally other services, like even just knowing what childcare camps, is there a babysitter agency, anything to support, or linking in through these different groups on WhatsApp or other social media or other instant messaging systems, explicitly saying to the rest of your community, we have these new people joining, here's what we may need help with for them, and reaching out. So it's that listening to how you can help, and then be open to experimenting with different things within that, so that you can meet the market needs, because it just keeps changing as well. Just keeps changing.
That is a great place to end, and solid advice. I didn't really think of that, so I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm going to quickly write that down before we publish this.
I knew you were going to say that. I was like listening to the pause, and I'm thinking Bernie's writing this down.
Yeah, so just because like we moved, there's a lot of people needing breaks, needing to get out of regions, sudden, that's just my personal experience. I just went through it when we moved to get out of Zaragoza for the 2 months that we could to Tarragona. And as I said already to you, Bernie, my co-working manager here in La Caravana, Hardy, has been amazing. And he just came in with that support for me and my husband and answered questions. And I actually said to my husband the other day, would we move again next summer if we could find back here, or go somewhere again where it provides that support as well, provides the extra services.
Thank you very much. So, any closing remarks, my esteemed colleague?
No, I think that the whole podcast, or this episode, was a great lesson in how we are rethinking remote work. So, and what we need to pay attention to and be mindful about when we're, still talking about remote work as a sort of, the picture of a digital nomad on the beach, instead of the harsh reality. Even though all of the points are not that, dark in that sense, and people can get accustomed to, of course, depending on the job position and stuff like that. But it really needs more people to talk about it.
Exactly that. And that's actually because we can't be in person. We need to be more intentional. I have to share that for someone who did this for years, I had head melt moments and I turned off the computer and said, take that away for 12 hours or whatever, when I was in the midst of the stress. And I stood on the terrace, and that was my outside space or whatever. But the acknowledgement that what I needed was away from screen time. In terms of digital health, that's also the thing that we're missing at the moment, that when we traveled to the co-working, to our shared office, when we go out for lunch with our colleagues, when we go and grab a coffee, when we take a walk in the park, all of that was taken away from us in full confinement. So I think that's really interesting, because people, until they list it, don't actually realize what they're missing.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yeah, we don't. And we're going to close on this. Bernie, you can remind people where they can find us.
if you rush to your nearest internet browser and type in coworkingassembly.eu and sign up to our weekly newsletter. And why I particularly want you to do that is because we publish this podcast and the other blog content we have there and have a little announcement. And then you can always hit reply to that email and it comes back to Jax, Janine, and me. And we will answer you personally. And over the past few weeks, we've been saying, anyone got a story here? And people have been emailing back. So it's a great place to have a direct contact with us because there's a lot of human beings all over Europe interested in co-working. The other thing I'd like to bring to your attention is in September, about mid-September, because I didn't have the bit of paper with the date on here, but mid-September, we're running a webinar as a London co-working, as the European Co-working Assembly, and that will be with Letitia and Antonin, and we'll be talking about the 15-minute city, which is basically why now in simple terms, it's we don't commute anymore, so we can all stay in our local area, and that is where I think co-working, not just me, but where co-working spaces can become part of the community, part of where people meet up and work, connect, work on projects together. And there's a lot of people already talking about this. If you have a 15-minute city story, get in touch with us because we'd love to hear it. And Rowena, thank you very much for your valuable time here today. And it was great to bump into you on the Edge Riders webinar about co-working, and we'll put a link to that in the next one in the show notes to this too. So, ladies and gentlemen, stay safe and be excellent to each other. Thanks for spending time with us today.